Monday night edition of the Anaheim Calling Podcast. We are here, Jake, to discuss another NHL draft that has come and gone. A lot to get into. The Ducks coming out of it with some pretty exciting picks. I think that's fair to say. We also have a pretty big bit of Ducks-related news to cover that we may or may not have actually gotten a chance to podcast about, although we heavily previewed it on the last pod. So it's almost as if we've already discussed it in a way. And that, of course, would be the news that Corey Perry has actually been bought out. The unthinkable has happened. It only happened 5 days ago. June 19th was the day that it actually officially happened. But Corey Perry bought out. He is now an unrestricted free agent, and we are all very anxious to see where he will land. Jake, you were unable to pod this weekend due to some extracurriculars on your end. Care to let the people in there?
Yeah. So as it turns out, my best friend is kind of a jerk, and I really hope he's listening to this because, I mean, for whatever reason, he decided to plan his wedding on the same weekend as the NHL draft. I mean, how inconsiderate of him.
How dare he?
How dare he? And
how dare he steal Moritz Seider's show?
Exactly. And I was the best man in the wedding, so I was a little preoccupied on Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning. So that is why we could not podcast this weekend. I paid attention a little bit, but for the most part have been doing my research in the past day or two. So I did watch the first round or the beginning of the first round, and I did see who the Ducks took. And I am very, very happy with the fact that they took Trevor Zegras. So I came out of the draft very, very happy.
Yes, I think that it certainly was a positive draft for the Ducks. A lot of people who pay attention to this stuff year round, not just for the 2 weeks leading up to the draft, seem to like their draft. And so that's always a good sign. Of course, doesn't really mean anything in the long run. Everything is kind of a crapshoot, but it does really feel as if the Ducks got a good player. You can't ever call it a sure value, but they got not only a guy who felt like the best player available at number 9 in Trevor Zegras, but also a guy who feels like he'll be an NHL player. We don't know to what degree, but it seems like he's going to be a pretty good player. Just a high-end playmaking center that could definitely become that basically already is the best forward prospect in this pool all of a sudden. And this is something that I wanted to touch on a little bit. Now we're already maybe getting a little too far ahead here, but what I like about the pick in Zegras, simply looking at his skill profile, is that not only is he a high upside pick, which I'm always a fan of, especially if you're not in that top 2, top 3 range, is he also just takes a lot of pressure off of the other guys. The guys like Max Comtois, Troy Terry, Sam Steele come to mind. The guys that the Ducks have so long been talked about as having this deep prospect pool, those guys are good, but I think Zegras has the potential to be great, and he takes a whole lot of pressure off of those guys. And so if any one of them now becomes really good, now you're looking at a much better situation. So it's a hard pick not to love, but maybe we should get more into the actual nuts and bolts of Zegras going 9th overall. So fresh out of the U.S. National Team Development Program, a historic draft for the USN TDP. I mean, they basically, the entire team just got drafted. That's pretty much how that shook out.
Pretty much. I mean, do we want to jump into the Perry news, a little bit more of the Perry news before jumping into this draft?
Well, let's cover the 9th pick, since it's kind of the most recent thing and it's the most exciting thing. We've already done a whole hour on Corey Perry, basically. We'll get on Perry, but let's just cover Zegras really quick, because I think that's probably what people want to hear about right now after a good weekend of Ducks news. But I mean, what do you think of the pick? As a fan of the team yourself, you must have some thoughts on it.
Yes. So Zegras was the player I wanted. Like, I'm just going to be straight up here. Out of all of the centers that were available, your Kirby Dach, your Alex Turcotte, your Dylan Cousins, your Peyton Krebs, and then obviously Trevor Zegras. Out of those 5, the guys that reasonably could potentially end up where the Ducks were, like I said, Turcotte was the only one that I really thought was never going to make it there. But Zegras to me was the most enticing. Let's go with that out of that group of 5, because the other guys all have their All have their things that they're good at, and each player has their strengths and weaknesses. Kirby Dach, very, very big type of player, very also smart, and can make some really good plays. But there are some knocks in his games.
He also went third overall,
yes,
to everyone's surprise,
yes,
which basically changed the entire draft
completely.
board.
Everyone thought that was going to be where Turcotte went. Turcotte, also a very good center, more of a two-way type of guy, not exactly as high offensive skill, but very much in the Jonathan Toews mold. Not saying that Jonathan Toews isn't high skill, but he's not someone that's going to blow your doors off with that skill level. He's more so a solid type of center. Yes, he has moments where he shows off. Obviously, he's in the NHL as a top scorer, but Turcotte's more so in that mold. Then you have Dylan Cousins, who's kind of more of a safer type of player. And so to me, what made Zegras so enticing as a player was kind of his high risk, his high skill ceiling. And you'll hear that a lot, I think, when you hear Trevor Zegras described, is that he has a very, very high skill ceiling. Now, there's a chance he may not hit it, and I think that's why some teams pass on him, because he's not exactly a safe pick by any means. I think that some of the other guys, like a Turcotte, like a Dach, are a little bit more safe, but Zegras could potentially have the highest skill ceiling, or be the most skilled, most offensively skilled out of that group. I mean, there are some people out there, I believe Corey Pronman maybe, had said that out of, basically he's the third highest skilled forward in this draft, behind Kakko and Hughes. So if you're looking for a guy that has offensive skill, can do some things, can bring the flair, Bob Murray even said, make some high danger passes, make some high risk plays, and said that is what we want him to bring. That's what you need in the modern day game. And that is a quote from Bob Murray, who's the most risk adverse person I think there is, or as risk adverse as there is in the NHL. And for him to say that shows you kind of what they wanted out of this pick. They wanted a guy that's going to be your first line center, and they finally have that. He's a guy that, now, granted, he's not exactly in the Getzlaf mold of playing physical. That's going to be more so the Kirby Dach's role moving forward, and that's kind of what you're going to see from him. He was compared to Ryan Getzlaf a whole lot. But Trevor Zegras was known as a guy that can quarterback a power play from the half wall, which when Getzlaf was at his peak was very, very good at. He can control play, can find seams that no one else can find. There are a couple of plays in his highlight reel package that are just absolutely insane, and they're ones that you really have to know what you're looking at to know how crazy it is. There was one where he was basically coming up out of the offensive zone, more so towards the neutral zone, puck's on the half wall, and he gets to it, does a quick little spin around, backhand pass, backhand saucer pass, finds Jack Hughes. It goes through three people at the time, finds Hughes, who's then in on goal and finishes. And granted, you have to have a guy there to finish it, but that type of play is insanely hard to make. And that's just one of the types of things that if you watch Zegras, a lot of his plays can end up on highlight reels because he's trying stuff. And on top of that, one other thing that he does so well that everyone kind of mentions as him doing really, really well is he makes really clean zone entries. And I think that's going to be a big thing. And that's a big thing of the modern day game is clean zone entries. And you're going to see that with the Ducks, with Trevor Zegras.
Right. I mean, everything that we're hearing about Zegras is high-end skill, high-end creativity, mobility, shiftiness, just a guy who can make plays, who's got a really good shot as well. It's basically exactly what you want in a top pick. I think that we've hit this interesting kind of pattern now with drafting where a lot of teams are prioritizing drafting defensemen because they want to reload that way. I'm really starting to become of the mind that all of your top picks should be on forwards, should be on just high ceiling forwards, because that's the hardest thing to get in the NHL. Whereas, defensemen, you see a guy like Tyler Myers potentially commanding $8 million a year on the free agent market. But I think generally speaking, you can find ways to put together a blue line that you can't really replicate that with the forward group. Even the St. Louis Blues, who just won the Stanley Cup, the guys that got them there, guys like Ryan O'Reilly and Vladimir Tarasenko, those are top elite forwards. And so I think that the Ducks, potentially if both Zegras and Steele pan out, that's a really nice 1-2. And it also opens up the way, or I should say, relieve some of the pressure from a guy like Isaac Lundestrom, who now could maybe comfortably be a third or fourth line center on the future Ducks. So really just a high end pick. And just to recap some of the stats from last year, So for the U.S. national U18 team in 60 games, he had 87 points. And then for the juniors, the national team development program juniors in the USHL, he had 40 points in 27 games. So the guy puts up points. He does it in bunches, committed to Boston University next year, which I guess brings us to our next point, Jake, is do you think we'll see Zegras as a member of the Ducks next season?
So this is an interesting question. And so here's kind of the very critical and important part to remember on this. If he is going to go to Boston University next year, then he cannot go to training camp. It is against NCAA rules for them to attend training camp. He actually can only go to the prospect camp this weekend on his own dime. The Ducks cannot pay for anything, his housing, how he gets here, anything like that. The Ducks cannot pay for any of that because of NCAA rules. So I went back and I was curious because Brady Tkachuk came to mind as someone last year who, granted, Brady Tkachuk had already played 1 year at Boston University prior to being drafted, so he would have been going into his sophomore year this past year. But he had to make his decision by August 12th at the absolute latest. So I'm going to assume it's going to be a very similar date as the date that Trevor Zegras has to make his decision by. So having said that, I think that this weekend is very critical because it's interesting. Bob Murray in the lead up to the draft, and if you give me a second, I want to find the exact quote that he had, but it was something along the lines of basically we want to draft a center, and we want to draft a center that will be able to come into onto the team right away, pretty much. And so said they were looking at 3 centers, which you can assume would have been Cousins, Doc, and Zegras. And I'm trying to find it very, very quickly. But I think the Ducks are going to give him a real hard look at this development camp. And, I mean, before we jump into it fully, but this development camp has a lot of the young guys that are going to be making the jump into the NHL this year. And I think if Zegras doesn't look completely out of his element, then I think they may try to push him to.
I kind of doubt it.
Well,
the thing is that the development camp. This is just my opinion, by the way, but the development camp. I guess is this even technically development camp?
Prospect.
That's late. That's later in the summer. This is prospect camp. It's a thing that is just teams do. It's kind of customary that guys come out after the draft and kind of get together with the other prospects. So, I mean, I guess to your point, if he just absolutely lights it up, maybe there's a chance if he's really dominant against his peers, which is absolutely plausible considering that although a lot of the guys there are going to have a leg up on him experience-wise, he's presumably already the best player there. That being said, though, I don't know how much upside there really is to having Zegras on the team next year. If you look at the center lineup and you already have Steele, presumably you already have Steele, Henrique, and Getzlaf. So I don't know. I mean, if he earns it, he earns it, I suppose. But is it really enough of a sample if he plays that well to kind of forego his college eligibility? I feel like the Ducks would want him to do a year at Boston University, which is, by the way, one of the very best college hockey programs in the country.
Completely.
So I don't know.
And I mean, Zegras has even come out and said, he's like, I really only need 1 year and that's it.
Yeah.
And I'm trying, and there was a quote though, let me find it really quickly. There was a quote from, also, by the way, Zegras had said, I think I'm good with zone entries, but I can help in all areas. He said, I'm pretty well decided on BU, but it's not set in stone.
Right.
So there's a little bit of wiggle room.
Which is kind of the new thing for all the young guys is they're all dead set on making the NHL from day one. So we'll see. I mean, I think it would be a great story, to your point, if he came out and just, embarrassed everyone on the ice and just proved that he was worthy of making it from day one. But knowing this Ducks organization and how they treat their prospects, I would be a little surprised if I would be very surprised if he made the leap in year one. But we'll see. Like I said, it would be a good story. Anything else you want to add in on Zegras?
I think that it's just really exciting. I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head, though, with it, that this just kind of takes a lot of pressure off Sam Steele. I think there was a lot of pressure on him from the fan base to become the heir apparent for the franchise at the center position. And I think we tried to temper that as much as we could, basically saying that, I mean, he's probably a 2-3, a second line center at best, or more so around a third line center. He's not going to be your top line center. That's just not a role that he should be in moving forward. And so I think that this allows for him to settle into that role long term and allows Zegras to be in that first line role. And I think also Ryan Getzlaf is still on this team and will still be on this team next season. And you could have the potential for a second line center, or a 1-2-3 down the middle of Zegras, Getzlaf, Steele. And if Steele develops, Zegras center develops, that's pretty interesting.
Well, Zegras could potentially be better than Ryan Getzlaf in 2 years.
Yeah.
just the way that kind of aging curves work.
Yep.
But by the way, Ryan Getzlaf will be playing the Ryan Kessler role this season, so he's got to start looking out anyway. Totally kidding. For those who got that reference, you can have your chuckle. So again, just to kind of reiterate, I thought, and we'll get into more of the Ducks picks as we go along here, but I thought that the Ducks could have almost done nothing else for this draft, and I thought come out of it with what they needed, which was a top-flight offensive option that could become potentially a number one center. That is something that they did not have in their system, and no matter how optimistic you are about Sam Steele or Isaac Lundestrom, you were just wrong if you thought that they truly could become first-line centers. Maybe they will, but that just seems – you got to play this with probabilities. And to me, that always seemed and is the least likely option. And so with Zegras, that potential is clearly there. There's no question that it's there. And so now, again, like we've just been saying here, takes pressure. I think the guy that it actually takes the most pressure off is Troy Terry. I think maybe Sam Steele is a close number two, but I think Troy Terry, although he's not a center, he's been looked to be that offensive spark plug out of the young core. And guys, and I think he's suffered from that a little bit. Fans have expected him to come in and be this offensive guy. Maybe I'm just biased because I podcast with you all the time, Jake, but I think that although he does have a good offensive skill set, he's still not a guy that I would want to rely on to put kind of the whole fate of my system on one guy. And I don't think that's how the Ducks were viewing it, but outside looking in, it did feel like he was kind of bearing that burden. So I think bringing in Zegras, I think we're going to see maybe a little pressure off of Troy Terry, because it kind of felt like he was playing with a little something hanging over him, especially in the beginning of last year. Just didn't seem really confident with the puck. So I think, again, it's a really big positive for the entire Ducks system here.
Yeah. By the way, Hockey Boys has an interesting question before we kind of move on. They said, I wasn't around when Nick Ritchie got drafted, but was there this much hype when he got drafted? I don't think there was, but I think part of that is more so due to the fact that at that point in time the Ducks were contending. They didn't have a year of suffering and only looking forward to the draft, and it's one of those things where I think it's more so the situation that we're in. I also think I think Zegras represents a whole different type of player than Ritchie did. Ritchie was a winger. Zegras is a center. I think the
one is a first liner, the other's a third to fourth.
Well, I think the other thing with it
keep going.
Is
one can skate.
Well,
one can't really.
Richie didn't exactly fall. He went right around where everyone expected him.
Which
to
in hindsight was probably not. He was very good, by the way, in his last year of junior. I don't want to take that away from him, but I think looking back, that's probably a pick that has not aged well.
No,
and
but I was just gonna say, you look at the guys directly behind him, and it's not awful. It's
not
just
awful, but
when you compare him to like Nikolai Ehlers, who was taken directly in front of him, it doesn't look great.
Where we are now, I think in drafting is I think guys are even that few years of a difference. I think guys are just better now. I think that the average top young prospect is just better than they were even 5 years ago. Guys are coming in so specialized, with skills coaches, with skating coaches, and those have been around. But I think that now it's just gotten to this whole new level. And I think that just the average pick, and again, I could be totally wrong about this. We'll see how it bears out in a few years. But I think now if you're drafting in the top 10, even if you're in the bottom half of the top 10, look at the guys that went even as low as 15 or 17 with Peyton Krebs. Those are guys who could potentially be first liners. Cole Caulfield going number 15. So there's still risk built into those guys, but I think that the ceiling overall is higher. And I guess maybe none of this is really a big point if it weren't for teams in the first round kind of reaching all over the place. You had the Coyotes going with Soderstrom at 11, although everyone kind of knew they were going to do that. The Canucks going to put Coles in at number 10. And then just before the Ducks, the Oilers grabbing Philip Broberg, who, although everyone expected them to make that pick, I don't think anyone would have said he was the best player available at number 8. I mean, I don't think a lot of people would have said that at least. And then, of course, Seider going to Detroit at 6, and then Turcotte, we'll call it slipping to number 5. So a lot of weird stuff happened in this draft that kind of allowed Zegras to get as low as 9. I think that's one thing we're maybe underrating a little bit or underselling is that Zegras is probably, his talent is probably higher than that of a number 9 pick. But the way that this draft shook out with team needs and things of that nature, he probably should have been a little higher.
Yeah. I mean, that a lot of people had him higher than 9. And so that's why it was a bit surprising. And you had, Detroit taking Seider. Is that the guy's name?
Yeah.
Moritz Seider. And I don't really know what else can be said about that. That was just such a reach of a pick. That pick felt like they were hoping to get Bowen Byram, and basically were set on getting defenseman after that, so they had to pivot to whoever they had as their second best defenseman.
And a lot of people really like Seider. It's just at number 6. It's a tough look. We'll see. But again, it's one of those things where it's interesting how people, and I get it, guys who cover the draft and cover prospects, they're very gung-ho about their best players available, their guys. But at the end of the day, it's all still a crapshoot.
Yep.
So it's interesting how that plays out. Okay, before we get to the rest of the Ducks draft, we should probably talk about Corey Perry, but let's do that after our first break. Okay, we are back magically from our first break. So, Jake, we did a very long podcast about this last week, so we don't need to talk about it a whole lot, but it is a pretty major bit of news in Ducks history. It marks a turning point for the franchise. Corey Perry, who has spent his entire 900-game-plus career, the most games played of any Duck in franchise history, he's been bought out. His cap space is officially, well, not officially, it's reduced. It's not off the books, but the Ducks will not have to pay, or I should say the Ducks will not have to occupy the entire 8.6 to their cap next year. That'll be reduced all the way down to 2, goes back up in year 2 to 6 point something, and then flattens out to 2 the next 2 years after that. So what would have been 2 years at 8.6 becomes a kind of a 4-year deal that's kind of scattered all over the place.
Yep.
All signs, though, point to this not really being about cap relief. The Ducks have a lot more cap space now, but it doesn't feel like this was really about getting that extra little bit of cap space so they could get in on the Anton Strawman sweepstakes.
And just for those of you out there that may be kind of curious as to why the buyout is structured the way it is, let's go with that. The fact that there's a $2.625 million cap hit this year, and that bumps up to $6.625 the year after, and why does that happen? The reason why is you can't buy out a signing bonus. So essentially the way it works is this year there is no signing bonus for Corey Perry. He would have been making $8 million pure base salary, but next year, and a lot of guys had their contract structured like this due to the potential for a lockout next summer. But he has a little bit less than half of his salary next season is in signing bonus, which means basically on July 1 of next year, next summer, he was going to get paid out $3 million. So you cannot buy out that $3 million. That is getting paid no matter what. And so that is why it's essentially that cap hit, you add that $3 million to it. So that is more or less, it's a little bit more complicated, but that is the basic reasoning behind why next season there is a $6.625 million cap hit. And this year it's 2.625, and then the following 2 years, 2021-22 and 22-23, it is $2 million each. Having said that, the buyout isn't about cap space. The Ducks are in decent shape cap-wise. They're currently sitting. We should also make mention that it was announced, I believe, on Saturday that the salary cap will not be the $83 million that was expected. It's actually down to $81.5. So the Ducks are actually in decent shape, though. They currently have $10.95 million in cap space. That is with the other news that we'll probably get into, but Ryan Miller under contract, Korbinian,
Yes.
Holzer, and Derek Grant under contract. And so they essentially have a 20-man roster, and they have three. Basically, they should have two more defensemen or one more defenseman at least signed. You also have Larson coming up. So the roster is kind of set at this point, and they have right now, without using long-term injury reserve, they're probably going to have right around $9 to $10 million in cap space. Probably 8 to 10.
They almost don't need the long-term injured reserve at this point.
No.
Yeah.
Having said that, the cap isn't really the huge issue. I mean, they're, like I said, 8 to 10 mil in cap space. So even if they had Perry on the books, they'd still have $2 to $3 million in cap space. That's before long-term injury reserve would kick in at all. So this kind of, long story short, and we broke it all down also last time, but this was done as a roster move. And Bob Murray basically more or less echoed that without saying it straight up. But basically, Bob Murray had a quote, and it was about whether or not he would have to give up an asset or take a bad contract back in order to get rid of Perry. So basically, Bob Murray, and this is a quote, says, "As I went along, I got that sense big time. Yes, I got that sense. I wasn't going to take back something that would have gotten in the way of some of our kids. In that respect, I wasn't going to do that. We tried, and they were really helpful in that area, but it wasn't going to happen." So more or less kind of what that's saying is he did not want to take back a contract or a player that would get in the way of the kids. And in my head, the way I'm also reading that is Corey Perry was in the way of the kids, and he wanted to get him off the team in order to open up those roster spots.
Right. I mean, it's one of those things where you read these quotes from Bob Murray and ownership, and it is striking to me. And I understand that it's the team media, but there's literally no explanation for why this happened.
Yeah.
There's no, not even an attempt. You know, when teams do stuff like this, they'll just give something like, well, we're going in a new direction, and we felt like it was nothing, not even anywhere close to that. You know, there's quotes about Perry's uniqueness on how Perry handled the news, and it's just like, okay, great. I mean, I guess this is good content, but I would kind of, you know, as someone who follows this team, I would kind of like to know what the reasoning was. But I think that it's just one of those unspoken things that if you can read between the lines, and if you've been following, they just didn't want Corey Perry on this team anymore. I think that Bob Murray and Corey Perry, I don't think ever got along great, especially in recent years. I think that the constant badgering through the media probably didn't help. I think that Bob Murray going down onto the bench during the last stretch of the season and seeing how Corey Perry interacted with the younger players, maybe there was a confirmation bias. Who knows what he actually saw down there.
Another quote by Murray?
Let's hear it.
So he said, "This is one of the hardest things I've done. It's tough. This guy epitomized what we have been for 14 years. He did whatever it takes to win, and that's how we've been." And it was a very tough call, but it became too very apparent at the very end to me. And down on the bench, that going forward, as we turn the page here, that this would be this would just be difficult for Corey and for us to have him here. And then Eric Stevens adds, translation, "There was no taste for seeing Perry reduced to fourth line status or press box watching if he couldn't be at his scoring and pestering form, and if the kids were out producing him."
Yeah, I mean that's what it comes down to, and so that's why, you know, people were going crazy on Twitter, you know, when the news broke about, there's no actual financial, you know, benefit, and how this doesn't make any sense. And yeah, that's true. If you look at it on its surface, it really doesn't make a ton of sense why they bought him out. Just from a strictly financial perspective, yeah, they're going to owe him a little less money, and it gives them a little more flexibility in year one. But I think Bob Murray literally says in one of these quotes, it's bad in year two. So clearly it's not about that. It's just about turning the page over. It's about getting a guy who, and again, this is just me speculating, but I think maybe a guy who wasn't all the way bought in on what was about to happen with this franchise. Corey Perry's a proud veteran who has played in a lot of meaningful playoff games, who's won a Stanley Cup, who's been in Olympic gold medal games. And so I think that for him to play a whole lot of meaningless hockey for the next year or two probably wasn't the most appetizing thing, and maybe showed up in some of his day-to-day interactions. Again, this is total speculation on my end, but it's just how I'm kind of seeing the situation. I don't think it's unreasonable. So where do we go from here? Do you want to talk about where you could see Perry ending up, or do you have more to add on, I guess, the fallout here?
The only thing I really want to add is Perry had this quote, and it got a fair amount of press, and I think that it's relevant and worth kind of bringing up. Because on the buying in part, or kind of something along those lines, some people thought maybe he had asked to be out or asked for the trade, wanted out, was done with the franchise. And I think this quote kind of from him really kind of says otherwise, so I think it's relevant. He said, this is Perry told TSN in his first public comments, "It stings. How many guys have played 1,000 games with one team? Not many. I sit here and say, well, with some of the injuries, I would have already been there. I was so close." And then Perry continues, "It was just one of those things. When I was told, I didn't expect that to come out of their mouths. I respect their decision. It's tough when you've been there for so long. It's all you know. But I don't have a bad word to say about the Ducks, how they've treated me over the years. Everyone in the organization was good to me." So,
yeah, I mean, he wasn't mistreated, and nothing about that really addresses anything I've said. It's just kind of the usual PR, from a player after things have gone south. And I'm sure, I don't think Corey Perry hated playing in Anaheim or hated the last couple of years. I just think that the actual hockey perspective, it did go south. His game severely declined the last couple of years. He dealt with a pretty big injury. He may never be the same again. We have no way of knowing. The early returns aren't great. He's going into, I think he's already 34. He's going to his age 34 season. So there's a lot of unknowns there. And I think that for Anaheim, we talked a lot about how, and this is a big sticking point that we brought up on our last podcast, is that if they were going to trade him, which clearly there was just no market for that, which actually I have a corollary there that I want to bring up. But, maybe waiting wasn't going to be that great of an option because the contract was still going to be there, and he may have been just as bad next season. There's just no way of knowing. And if you look at what the Toronto Maple Leafs had to do over the weekend, attaching a conditional first round pick to 1 year of Patrick Marleau on a significantly lower cap hit to the Carolina Hurricanes, I think that kind of shows to you a little bit how difficult it would have been for the Ducks to move out Perry without giving up anything, or at least giving up anything of worth. That 29th pick was actually probably better off being used for Brayden Tracey, and then the rest of that cap space just being bought out. So I think to grade the move, maybe this will be our new thing. We'll grade the move. I don't know if I'll give it a letter grade, but I think I give it a passing grade. I think all in all, kind of big picture, just cold, hard look, I think this was probably the right call. I think it leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouths for now. I'm sure that'll subside with time. Maybe it wasn't handled as well as it could have been. But I think when you look at what kind of corner they had backed themselves into, and with the options they have left, this might actually have been the best option left to take.
Yeah, I mean, my argument would be I'm going to give it probably a C, so a pass.
I think I'll give it a C plus.
I think the downside with it is that if you look at it, it's that this is something of their own doing.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. So I am grading it from the perspective of the remaining options that they had.
Yes.
In front of them.
I get what you're going
But if you want to grade it from the how we got here perspective, the grade may go down.
Yes.
Pretty significantly.
And I think that's where we're at, because you look at the Corey Perry deal. That was what he was worth. He got what he was worth, and he got the years that he was worth when he signed it. And what happens is when you give guys, and for good and bad, the Jakob Silfverberg deal. That was
here we go.
No, but like
we're back.
No, but being completely honest, that is the deal that signed Perry's fate, because there was no more roster spots. They were gonna probably need some cap space, and so that deal kind of locked it in. You also look at giving Patrick Eves the money that they did. off of a short amount of time, and it's just kind of a domino effect. When you start giving out deals on deals on deals with term is what kills you. And we're probably not going to talk about this too much, but the William Karlsson deal, the thing that's going to kill them long term with that deal, it's not the term or the AAV, because the AAV is fine. It's the term. That's what kills you. You can give term to your superstars because they're your superstars. You should do that to try to keep them. But when you start giving out term to guys who aren't your first-line players, that's when you get into trouble. The Ducks are getting into that with Kessler. They're going to probably get into that with
William Karlsson was in year one of the Vegas Golden Knights.
Yes, but he's no longer their first-line center, and he won't be moving forward. And that's an issue. And so I think the Ducks are in that trouble spot right now and could be moving forward with the cap due to that. So I think when you look at if you look at what they could have done in order to open up roster spots and kind of where they are moving forward, I think that this probably is a B. I think if you look at the entire grand scheme of how they got here to this point and not having Perry even hitting 1,000 games, I think that definitely makes it a little bit lower.
Well, okay, so if you're grading it from just a kind of franchise image, feel-good story perspective, it's obviously not a passing grade.
Yeah.
But that being said, isn't at this point in time, what's the better allocation of funds? Jakob Silfverberg or Corey Perry?
Yeah, I'm not.
Who's the
not
better? I mean,
disagree.
clearly, Jakob Silfverberg is still probably, even with his contract, probably going to be a positive value for another couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Corey Perry hasn't been positive value for probably 2 years. And you could, if you really want to play this game, you could take it even further. Re-upping Andre Kasha. They were always going to do that.
Yeah,
but
that one's
they
fine.
did give him that deal. That's another right winger. Bringing in Daniel Sprong. That's another right winger. Yep. And then Troy Terry kind of giving him the prolonged look that he got last season. Another right winger. So it was just kind of one of those things that was probably bound to happen with Corey Perry. And again, maybe I take back what I said about looking at the big picture, because all of those guys are probably better suited, options on this roster right now than Corey Perry. I mean, we're kind of underplaying how depleted Corey Perry looked last season. And again, there's time for rehab, but if basically at this point, you're hoping that he gets to where he was before the injury, which was kind of an okay player. He's still a guy who can help teams, but all the numbers really don't paint a super favorable picture of him. And I don't know. Maybe I take it back a little bit. I think that the Ducks I think overall from a fan perspective, it's very easy and very understandable to feel not too pleased about this, but I think this is kind of probably what you should do in this situation. It's actually what we fault teams like the Kings for not doing. True. Is that they hold on to their veterans for too long until they rot on the shelf, and then everyone hates them. Maybe in a way, Bob Murray gave Corey Perry a bit of a dignified ending where he can now go to another team and play a significant role, as opposed to maybe ending up where some of those veterans in LA or other teams go, which is kind of nowhere.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
One thing I want to bring up, that it's something that's kind of been going around the internet now, that Perry is saying he's training harder now than he's ever been. Kristen threw in our Twitch chat, he said that this is the first time he's been back on the ice prior to August. And kind of she made the comment that's a little irritating. One thing that I'll kind of add to that is I don't believe all guys get on the ice even in July. Some guys basically take all of June off, no workout, just kind of relax. July, they start hitting the gym again, and then they don't see the ice until late July, early August. Now, every guy has different training regimens, different things that they go with. But I will say for Perry, this is probably a little bit of a kick in the butt. Kept that.
It should be.
Yeah,
it should be. And what's interesting, just to add to your point, is that if you remember, Bob Murray, I think a couple of years ago, made the comment, it looks like some guys took the summer off from training. Mm-hmm. And so for him to come in with this is the earliest I've trained, maybe doesn't, looking back now, maybe Bob Murray had a little bit of a point. Who knows? Yeah.
And so, but I think that, it's a little bit irritating, but I think it also, it has to do with kind of where he was at. And maybe this is the kick that he needed. And I don't know. I just think everyone has their own training methods. I don't know if I'm going to get too irritated by it, but just wanted to briefly bring that up. Let me see what was it? Oh, George had a question saying, can Perry play that new style of hockey that many teams are now using? I think so, and I think whatever team he goes to, they're gonna insulate him and put him in easy minutes that he can take advantage of, and whether that's in a third or fourth line role, who knows? But I think that he's gonna go to a place where he can succeed, and I think that it's all about kind of having guys around you that can play that role, especially when you're an older guy like Corey Perry. I don't know if he really needs to adapt his game that much. It's more so insulating him with other guys that can complement him well.
Right. I mean, what's interesting with Perry, Andrew Berkshire wrote a really good article in Sportsnet with all of the Sport Logic data outlining just how Corey Perry's offensive game has really fallen off the last few years, not just from a, shot metric perspective, but like shot creation, passes into the slot, dangerous shots, that type of thing. And so what kind of is striking about that is how much he's declined while also still playing next to Ryan Getzlaf. It's not as if he was declining and wasting away on a fourth line. He was still getting top usage with a really good playmaker in Ryan Getzlaf. So I think that what Corey Perry is going to need, the ideal situation for him at this point in his career, is going to be somewhere where he can be on a third line that has a good kind of play-driving center where he doesn't really have to do any of the heavy lifting, where he can basically just chip in offense because it's been created for him. Because I still think he has that touch around the net.
Yeah.
It's just he's not really going to will himself there anymore.
Yep. And before we take a quick break, I do want to just make mention, I believe the teams that I have seen that have been interested in him are, I believe I've seen LA been linked to him. I've seen Nashville. I have seen Pittsburgh. And I think Chicago's the other one. Sorry. And so those are the four teams that I've kind of seen around. Pittsburgh would make the most sense to me personally. Maybe Nashville also, as much as Ducks fans are going to hate that.
Well, Nashville has the cap space now. And actually, Perry, apparently Nashville was a team he would have been willing to waive his no-move clause for. So his ironclad no-move clause, Jake, supposedly he was willing to waive him for Nashville.
Great.
There you go.
All right. So we're going to take a short break here, though, and when we get back, we'll jump back into the draft and talk more about the Ducks entry draft this year. So we'll be right back. And we are back. I know that was a really long break for you, for those of you watching us live. One thing I want to mention, because Ken Pathu, a guy who's Tony, who is a loyal listener, one of our patrons in our Discord chat, he kind of really had some opinions on the entry draft and thought that the Ducks were making a mistake by taking Zegras over Caulfield.
Ooh, that's a
what
spicy
are your
one.
thoughts?
I don't agree. As much as I love that the Canadians drafted Caulfield 15th, I think that he was the right combination of pick, right? So at 15, there is some built-in risk with drafting Caulfield. The size, you don't know if his game is necessarily going to translate to the NHL. I think most smart people agree that it will, but at 15, it's a lot different than taking him at 9, where there are guys who just have a higher floor. And I think that in addition to that, Caulfield is a winger, and inherently there's just more value in today's league to having a top center, getting a top center with your first pick. So I think that for where the Habs were, where guys that they were interested in were already off the board, and maybe you could argue they should have gone with Peyton Krebs, I think that it was the right upside play at 15. But I don't think that the Ducks taking Caulfield at 9 would have made a ton more sense than taking Zegras. I think Zegras doesn't have as much offensive upside in a best case scenario for both guys as Caulfield, but I think that he can probably impact the game a bit more as a center, which is what you want with your ninth pick. You want, or in a ninth pick, you want a guy who's going to be the bedrock or potentially the bedrock of your group, your forward group moving forward. So no, I don't agree with that. Although I love Caulfield, believe me, I love Cole Caulfield. I don't think that would have made a ton of sense. And would it have made sense for a team like Detroit? Would it made sense for even a team like Edmonton? Probably. But they were set on their guys. I really am curious how these defensemen that were drafted ahead of some really good forwards, how they're going to pan out.
Yeah.
Because the Brobergs, I'm blanking on it, Soderstroms,
the Cam York.
I think Cam
Not
York.
as
I'm actually probably higher on him than some of those
Fair.
guys. Maybe I'm wrong for that, but even still, I am very
More
curious
excited.
how history will look back on those, because there were so many good forwards in this first round that, again, it's one of those things, like I was saying earlier, they look great now and you can be really staunch about them now, still a crapshoot. But I just think that's the hand you're dealt. You got to play it with the probabilities. And so just taking a guy because he's your guy or because you need a defenseman, even though who knows what you'll need 5 years when he's ready. It's interesting. And then there's the Florida Panthers drafting a goaltender, number 13, in Spencer Knight, just going totally. I mean, everyone knew that they were going to take a goalie, but still, that's
a bit of a reach.
That's something else.
Bit of a reach.
A bit, yeah, just a bit.
I did want to mention. So Tony responded in our Twitch chat, said, "I don't think that Zegras is a bad player. I do, however, feel like the Ducks need goals, not passes." And so I think my rebuttal to that is that yes, Caulfield can score, but I think the impact on the game overall comes from the center position more so than the wing. I believe that Zegras is going to have more of an impact. No, he may not score as many goals as Caulfield, but he's also going to set up a fair amount of goals and be the reason that a fair amount of those goals are scored, kind of in the Getzlaf mold at times. I mean, let's be real. The Ducks need a Getzlaf replacement. We've made no bones about that for a year or two
they
now.
don't need – a lot of people have been kind of looking – and, I mean, rightfully so. Ryan Getzlaf's probably a Hall of Famer. A lot of people have been saying, well, they need a Getzlaf replacement, and that's why a lot of people were high on Dylan Cousins for the Ducks. They need a guy to be the next Getzlaf, and I think that's kind of the wrong way to look at it. You don't need literally another tall center who maybe isn't the best skater, who's a fantastic playmaker. You just need another top center. You need another number one center.
However he plays, it doesn't matter. As long as he
yes.
as long as he helps you win and score and helps you score goals, that is what you need.
Exactly. So it doesn't have to be exactly in the mold of Getzlaf. It just has to be a guy who literally can be a number one center. And that's, I think, what they got in Trevor Zegras. You know, I think that they could have drafted Peyton Krebs, and it would have been a defensible pick. He kind of slid because teams were really need hungry in this draft.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that overall, again, just on that pick alone, it was a good draft for the Ducks. Now, do you want to get into the later picks? Because there were some pretty good picks. I thought that they had a good draft overall.
But before that, I do want to make mention, Eric Stevens had an article today that came out.
Yes.
Where he made mention, he had this quote from Martin Madden. And so he kind of insinuates that this was Peyton Krebs because of him falling and the Ducks being linked to him. But I think it can be taken with two different players. But Madden said, we had a plan in place to get a mid-first round pick to jump on the guy that was falling. He just went before the pick that we had a chance to get. That would have been an interesting story. Now, it all coulda, shoulda, woulda, but to me, that reads as either Cole Caulfield or Peyton Krebs.
I think it would have been Krebs.
And if the Ducks could have pulled off either of those, they would have come out of that first round being the absolute winners of the draft.
Yeah.
But coulda, shoulda, woulda type of thing, fun to think about, but I'm going to try not to think about it too much because it will just make me sad that it didn't happen.
Well,
Stupid
let's
Vegas.
talk about Brayden Tracey, the 29th overall
let's talk
pick.
About him.
Yeah, I mean, he had a really good season in the Western Hockey League. Yeah, Rookie of the Year, 36 goals and 81 points. He's a guy who's not really necessarily listed as a fantastic skater, but has a good feel for the game, has some good offensive tools. Just feels like maybe not necessarily a pure upside play because it actually feels like he has a decent floor as maybe a bottom six kind of playmaking guy, but it does feel like he is a guy who could turn out to be maybe a top 9 offensive option, a top 9 winger. And so I think that that's something that, again, I really valued. Also, you looked at some of the different statistical models, like with Manny Perry's
that was an interesting
prospect
thing.
model. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's really hard to kind of look at and take at face value. But if a guy like Brayden Tracey is grading really highly in that, it's just another data point. It's something to consider. A lot of people like his puck skills, passing, has a real quick shot. So he's another guy who I could see almost like a Troy Terry in a way, kind of sneaking up the depth chart, as the years go on, maybe a little unexpectedly. And again, it's a pick that, it's funny, Anaheim's draft this year, at least towards the top of the draft, it felt like it was the opposite of last year, where they played it completely safe, getting Isaac Lindstrom. And hey, maybe some years you need those guys, and I think someone else has said this on another podcast, but it was a good year to have 2 picks in the first round, because there was so much forward talent, so much forward depth, that you could kind of just take swings. And the Ducks didn't really take a swing in Zegras. He was basically slotted for, that kind of 3 through 7, 3 through 9 range. But Tracey is a guy who you could take a chance on. You already have your known commodity in Zegras.
Yeah, so I think that's what makes him a little bit of a high-risk play here. Is I think the thing that's a high-risk play for him is that this was his first year playing a major junior this past year, and he won Rookie of the Year, which is great. But
which is good.
Yeah, as a 16-year-old, he was playing at midget AAA, which I believe is not standard for a 16-year-old. The top-end guys
at all.
The guys who are going to be drafted in the first round are playing in junior as 16-year-olds, at least at the top end of it. But Canada U18 coach, the Canada U18 coach, had this to say on him. He's an opportunistic shooter. He goes to the hard areas where goal scorers score goals. His feet are a bit of a concern, but hard to argue with his production. So I think that production right there is going to be a fair amount of the reason why a model like Manny's will favor him, because his production was there. If you look at his age, I think he's on the younger end of the draft eligible players, and so that kind of grades out well. So I think that makes him a little bit of a high risk play, but I think that that's kind of what you want to do with this late round pick. And
because what's the point of playing it safe? You can get depth players off the scrap heap every summer. There's no issue doing that. So to me, and this is where I actually kind of buy the stat models a bit more than the eye test, is because if you're a younger rookie in one of the best junior hockey leagues in the world, and you're Rookie of the Year putting up points, you're probably going to be pretty good. Like those two things should be enough. For whatever reason, I think that scouting, in a way, it's almost too much information. Sometimes you just got to look at it as, okay, this guy did that. I should feel confident that he's at least someone I should be interested in. Then you get into the tools, you get into the character stuff, and then you try to parse out how real it was. But if he's already doing that, I just feel like you're probably have already a base of talent that you just don't have with other players who would be deemed safer.
Yep, I think what makes him a risk play is just sample size. The sample size isn't there. So
yeah, but guys who get drafted are usually in their first year of junior. I mean, it's not any smaller of a sample size than most guys that we look at. So anyway, hey, this is me beating the drum for your pick, Jake. So you should be happy.
I think it was a good pick. I think that it's one that could pay off, and a lot of people are saying, is he going to be the Corey Perry to Zegras' Getzlaf? And maybe long term he does. I mean, that was one of the
much different addition.
Much different,
a lot more speed.
But it's going to be fun to see. It's going to be really fun to see. And then the next pick, the first draft pick for the Ducks in the second round at number 39 was Jackson Lacombe. Lacombe. How do you say it?
Jackson Lacombe.
Lacombe. We're going with it. Lacombe. Jackson Lacombe, who played for Shattuck St. Mary this past year. He's basically described himself as an offensive defenseman. He's a guy that can really bring the puck up the ice. Corey Proman also said defensively he's got a bit of an edge and closes on guys well. With his skating, while he makes some plays and plays the game hard, I question how well he thinks the game some shifts. He can be turnover prone and out of position defensively. So he is actually going to be going to college this next year, and so hopefully he'll be able to work on the defensive side of the game. But it seems like his mobility and ability in the offensive zone is very, very high, and so if he can find a way to be able to limit those turnovers and get himself into better positions, I think that this could be a very good pick for the Ducks.
Yeah, it's interesting how you look at how the Ducks, how Martin Madden and his scouting staff kind of structured their draft strategy this year, and This is kind of how I go about my fantasy football. No, I'm just kidding. My fantasy football draft. They went for the upside.
Yes.
They went for the talent in their first couple picks. And then you look at the next picks with Lacombe, and we'll get into Henry Thrun, but they kind of went for guys to kind of stock up things that they needed.
Yes.
So Lacombe, a guy who I don't necessarily love the pick, because a lot of the things that people are saying about him don't necessarily they don't really equate to high skill level, but a mobile defenseman, a guy who can show poise with the puck, I think that that's a guy that you can definitely mold.
Yes.
The Ducks have absolutely shown an ability to get the most out of those guys. I mean, you look at even a recent project like Simon Benoit in San Diego, who's kind of become a key piece down there, a guy who kind of just came out of nowhere. And then we can kind of skip a little bit to Henry Thrun here, but he's kind of the opposite, it seems, of Jackson Lacombe, where maybe mobility, maybe skating isn't really part of his strength profile, but he's also got a ton of puck smarts. He's got a lot of offensive ability, a guy who could play on the power play. There's also a pretty big gap in those picks. I mean, Lacombe was picked at number 39, and Thrun was picked at number 101. So clearly you're not going to get as much expected value there, but I kind of like the draft strategy. Go big with your top picks, and then later on where, okay, maybe taking a swing there, it's not a bad strategy, but if you've already taken your swings, maybe just use those picks to kind of restock a little bit, because the Ducks have gotten pretty thin on the blue line in their prospect system. And
they
so
definitely have.
I think just adding bodies who have upside is definitely the way to go. And Henry Thrun, who, by the way, is a Harvard commit. So the Ducks kind of showing a little love to the college ranks this draft.
5 of 7, as Daniel JJ09 mentions, 5 of 7 are going the college route. And Zegras, Lacombe, Henry Thrun, Trevor Janicki, and William Francis. And then Matthew Hill and Brayden Tracey are the only two staying in junior. So a fair amount of college players this year. It's going to be interesting when the NCAA tournament comes around, because there's going to be a lot of guys to follow this year and a couple years to come. Yeah,
absolutely. And then beyond that, the Ducks drafting 2 more defensemen, William Francis and Matthew Hill, at number 162 and 186, guys who could potentially have some upside.
And Trevor Janicki.
Janitsky?
There we go.
I don't know.
But Henry Thrun's actually a guy that I'm very intrigued by, because Central Scouting had him at number 39 and the Ducks got him at number 101. And basically any place that you look or any analysis that you have of him, essentially everyone's basically like he was best player available by a mile at that point in time. And
there was a lot of love for that pick. If you were just kind of following along the draft on Saturday, the draft heads were pretty excited about that one.
Yeah, so I'm very much excited about it. He's not going to be kind of a flashy type of defenseman, though. More so kind of a stable type of guy. And so I'm excited to see what can happen from him. I think that kind of covers overall the draft. What would you give the Ducks draft overall on the whole?
Oh, boy. That's a good question. A grade. I think I'm going to go I'm going to bake in the uncertainty that comes with drafting players in the NHL. I'll go B+.
Yep.
I think that given where they were, I think this is probably the biggest caveat I want to throw in is number 9 and number 29. Those can be really difficult spots to draft from. I think that the Ducks were definitely helped out by other teams going a little crazy. Yes. But still, I think that they did well for themselves. I'm going to give them a very solid B+.
Yeah, and I think that for me, the A grade really needs to be kind of left for if they would have somehow pulled off that move and gotten Krebs and Zegras. So I think I'm going to go B+
and
also.
I'm just less excited about the picks later on as well. I'm not hearing a lot of buzz. After maybe outside of Thrun, it just little less excited about those picks, so that's why I can't go full A. But a lot of my grade is composed of just almost Zegras entirely.
Yeah, and not having a 3rd round pick hurts, and I know that can't fully affect your draft grade. But I mean, the overall players that they got, the quality is not as high as it would have been as if they would have had a 3rd round pick. So I think that Zegras pick really kind of gets this up into a high spot. So I'm very excited about it. One thing I did want to mention that is very exciting and kind of interesting to think about, the U.S. National Development Team program. They put together an absolutely insane roster this past year. What would it be? I think they had 7 guys in the first round, or 7 guys in the top 15 be taken. They had Jack Hughes. They had Alex Turcotte. They had Trevor Zegras. They had Boldy. They had Spencer Knight. They had Cam York, and they had Cole Caulfield. And then they also had a fair amount of guys after that get taken also, like a Henry Thrun, be taken in the 4th round by the Ducks. And so there was a lot of talent on that team. And I'm curious if in basically 5-10 years down the line, we look back on that team and we just are like, that team was probably one of the best we would ever see. If you were to have all those guys on the same team now, that would win the cup easily. And actually, Boom Snap Bam brings up the point that actually every single player was drafted.
Yeah. No, it really is it's historic, I guess is the only way to put it. I mean, the quality of that team for almost all of them to get drafted, I guess all of them, Zegras, Turcotte, Hughes,
so many high-end players also.
That's the thing, is they're all really good players. Cam York. I gotta start calling him Cameron York. No one. It seems like everything is written as Cameron York. Cameron York, Cole Caulfield, John Beecher, Alex Vlasic. You just go down the line, and it's a really good year for that program.
Yeah.
And I think it just makes total sense. It's the natural evolution of something that has been years in the making. This hyper specific program. You know, the guys just live and breathe hockey. It's basically a pro program, but the cool thing, what it looks like from the outside, is just it's kind of a brotherhood. The guys really seem to mesh.
Yeah.
And it's exciting. I think it's always cool, and it's good for the growth of the game in the U.S. as well, which is another thing to be excited about. And some of the guys have kind of some diverse backgrounds. I mean, you look at Cameron York, who's from Orange County, and so I think it is cool to kind of see that diversity a little bit, of course, as diverse as hockey can be. Okay, that's kind of all I have to say overall. Did you want to talk a little bit about some of the trades? There weren't really a whole lot, but there's the big trade that we can touch on.
Let's talk about the big trade. The very, very big one.
PK Subban.
PK Subban traded from Nashville to New Jersey. And I'm very happy he's out of the Western Conference, and especially out of Nashville, because I like being able to root for PK, and it's hard to root for him when he's on Nashville. So I'm very happy about this. New Jersey is going to be very, very good next year. You add Jack Hughes to their lineup. You add PK Subban to their lineup. I think they're going to be good.
This is actually a good point of transition for something that you wanted to talk about, but let's first cover the trade a little bit here. So the Nashville Predators send PK Subban, and the New Jersey Devils send Steven Stantini, Jeremy Davies, and then 2 second-round picks in 2019 and 2020, which would have been the number 34 pick that the Predators used. So 2020 is going to be a good draft, supposedly, so that'll be interesting. But PK Subban, I think what I'm interested to see, because there's been a lot of talk about how he's maybe declined over the last year, and I think that there is a little statistical backing to that. I also think that the role he's played in Nashville, I don't think it's full PK mode. I think that he can be a lot more of an offensive guy when there's not a Yossi or even an Ellis to kind of take on those assignments. I think that now he's the guy on the back end. And if you look at that roster now for the Devils, they just drafted Jack Hughes. They still have Taylor Hall. They're trying to keep Taylor Hall. Make no mistake. I think this is part of that.
They have Heischer, they have Palmieri. They have Will Butcher on the back end. They have Sammy Vatanen on the back end.
So this is going to be an exciting team. Now, it may all come down to how good their goaltending is. We don't know what we're going to get out of Corey Schneider or Mackenzie Blackwood.
Yeah.
Maybe they go for an upgrade there. But even a guy like Jesper Bratt, who kind of came out of nowhere last season. So I'm very excited to see that team. Now, what's interesting is a lot of people were bemoaning the return, for the Predators. It's really not a whole lot.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is that so much of this for the Predators was about creating cap space to upgrade their forward group, which I find very interesting because basically it's not that they're creating cap space to bolster their forward group. They're creating cap space to go after Matt Duchene and basically be able to offer him as much as they can, which I find a little interesting because I like Matt Duchene. He's always been a player that I really enjoy watching. I don't know if he's the guy that you necessarily clear the deck for, though.
No, I mean, now they're going to have Ryan Johansson as their second-line center, and I'm trying to look...
Which is good. Which is a positive.
Which is good until you look at how much he's making.
Which is where but the contract he's on now is kind of a function of what he was for them, which was their first-line center.
Yeah, but he's still going to be making $8 million until the 2024-25 season. And so you're going to have a second-line center making $8 million and a first-line center making probably what? We think Duchesne's going to get $9 million? If Kevin Hayes got $7 million.
Yeah, he's probably going to get up there. But look, here's the thing with the Predators. They're trying to win now. So, looking at future value, future, decline, it's going to be there. This is the cost of being a win now team. You're going to sign some deals that are going to be problems on the back end. But here's what I want to ask you, though. Is a Predators team without PK Subban and you bring in a Matt Duchene, how much better is that team than the one that they rolled out last season? That's, I think, to me, the big question with this trade.
I think it's worse, personally. I
think it's worse?
I think it's worse with Duchene instead of Subban. That's just me personally, though. I think Duchene is such a crapshoot with what's going to happen to him. So I don't really know. The one thing that I think is very interesting about this, and it's something that...
Okay, wait, hold on. Before you go there, I just want to get one last point in on this. I think that there is a possibility that the Predators are better next year. I think it's a pretty real possibility. I think that the ripple effect of having another true top six guy, another true top line guy, not Kyle Turris, who can come in and alleviate some of the pressure from Ryan Johansson, from Phil Forsberg, really from their entire center or their entire forward group. I think that could be a little bit underrated here. And also maybe bringing up a guy like Dante Fabro, who a lot of people like as a younger defenseman, maybe him coming in and being really good. Maybe this team is better next year. Maybe they have a higher ceiling with a better forward group. Again, I don't love it. I think I understand why they had to do it. I think this is the wrong summer maybe to be doing this because I don't think Duchene is necessarily worth it. But I don't want to just entirely dismiss the possibility that this actually works out great for them. Anyway, now to your point.
Yeah. So my point is that there's been a lot of talk about you can't evaluate the Subban trade because the Subban trade, what was it? Stantini, Davies, and 2 second-round picks for PK Subban, which is very underwhelming as a whole. And so everyone's basically like, well, it's that plus the, what was it, $8 million in cap space that they got?
$9 million.
$9 million in cap space that they got for him because they didn't have to bring any salary back. And yes, I'm the first to admit the first thing I do is go and look at cap friendly when a trade happens or when I'm trying to dissect what the Ducks are going to do. I'm the first to say that cap space is an asset and it's something that can be utilized. But I feel like people are getting lost the idea of value also. And that PK Subban brings pretty much proper value to that cap hit. So yes, you are removing that cap space, but I don't understand the logic behind the thought of, well, they're gaining cap space as an asset. Well, they're gaining cap space by losing someone of good value.
Right. This isn't necessarily to me the textbook example of I think what you're trying to get at. Typically teams create cap space without having to lose one of their very best players.
Yes.
To bring in, to basically shuffle the chairs around.
Patrick Marleau, for instance, is a clear. Patrick Marleau is a clear example.
That makes sense
of where you look at it and say that's a negative value contract that is hurting this team. They need to give up. They had to give up something to have someone take him.
But it's worth it. The cost is definitely worth it to keep the Mitch Marner. Kapanen has been re-signed already.
But
there's definitely value there.
The thought of Subban requiring less to get simply because of the cap space that will then be acquired. It's just there's something off with that. It's a little messy. It's a little bit messy. I get where it's coming from, but to me, it's people looking too much at the cap hit and looking too much at that and kind of missing the point of you still have to look at the value this player brings with his cap hit, and I think that was lost in this trade. And I think PK Subban's, I think he's going to be a great player for the Devils.
Yeah.
I think he's not going to have to fight. I was listening to something today, and someone mentioned that he's not going to have to fight for power play time anymore. And so
that's the thing. That's what I wanted to chip in here is that yes, he is fair value at his cap hit, but on that deal for Nashville, but I don't necessarily think you're getting the full value because of how their team is structured, because of Yossi being such a dominant force. And I don't necessarily mean dominant just by him actually putting up points, but just he has the puck so much on the power play. He's basically a forward out there if you watch the Predators play. And I think Subban kind of thrives when he's the guy that's kind of driving that bus a little bit. And I don't know if the way that they were set up, he could necessarily be that. Again, this is all not as empirical as I would like it to be, but I think that there is some truth to it. And so I think now for the Devils, I think that they're going to get more value out of that $9 million than the Predators could have. Again, that's not, I don't think that justifies shipping him out to bring in Matt Duchene because Matt Duchene likes country. But it's just kind of a weird one. That being said, and I think we've already touched on this, I am excited to watch this team because if nothing else, they're going to be a fun team to watch.
They're going to be so much fun to watch. They're going to be so much fun to watch.
And they still have a lot of cap space. I mean, they have a bunch of guys to re-sign, but they have $25.7 million in cap space. They have a bunch of, they have Pavel Zacha, who's an RFA. But after that, they don't really have a big names to bring back. I mean, Will Butcher is probably the biggest one as an RFA with arbitration rights, and I guess Mirko Mueller. But they're still going to have some room to play around. So who knows what else Ray Shiro's got up his sleeve? But it's going to be a fun team to watch next year. Probably going to be right up there on my NHL TV.
They're still under the cap
list.
floor, I guess.
I mean, I don't know how that's possible. They have a bunch of guys to re-sign, but that's going to be fun.
A couple more Ducks related news items before we start jumping into some questions. So
I can't believe it took us this long to get here. So here we are.
Couple things. First things first. Let's tackle this real quick first. Eric Stevens made mention today that Francois Beauchemin has been brought in, or is looking like he's going to be brought in an organizational role to help out Todd Marchant in player development. Todd Marchant is, I believe, the director.
As we all expected.
So interesting because I think Beauchemin lives in Montreal. I don't know if this means he's moving back here or if he's just going to be consulting, watching film, kind of traveling every once in a while, once a month over here. But makes sense. Interesting move. No idea. I really can't say it's good or bad because I don't think we really know what Francois Beauchemin can bring in a player development role. It's one of those things you want to feel good about it because of his standing with the organization, what he did for it. But I think it's one of those things that you got to see how it plays out and how it happens. The Ducks got lucky with Todd Marchant being able to do everything so great. So the other things that happened, you had Korbinian and Holzer signed a 1-year deal for $850K. Good deal? Bad deal? Any thoughts on the deal?
I thought you were going to skip to the next one. Yeah, I mean, I think that they just needed bodies on the back end. I think that Holzer's been good enough to where you can bring him back as kind of a guy who can fill in a pinch, who can maybe add a little bit more under Dallas Eakins. But I think generally he's just kind of fine to have around. People seem to like him. I give it an A grade. Boom, going all out with the Holzer grade here.
Savage. Yeah, I think $850K is it's a solid, it's minimum value. If he gets sent down, there's going to be no remaining cap
It's what he's going to get at age 31.
Yeah.
People kind of forget that he's 31, but you can't really bring in a guy who's been around that long.
And I think there's some value to having a seventh defenseman who's happy in his role, can fill in a pinch.
Yeah.
No, he's not the greatest ever, but he can fill in when you need him to and you can't get a guy up in time.
And he's not terrible. I think that we're kind of stuck in 2016 evaluation of Holzer. He's not this terrible pariah out there.
No.
He is what he is, like you said.
And I think with that move, I believe I've seen Yanni Hankinpaa is going to sign, or it's going to be announced on July 1st. They have to wait due to some eligibility rights and things like that till July 1 to announce it. Once he is announced, I believe the Ducks' 7 defensemen will be set for next season with Jacob Larson and Hankinpaa and Holzer all under contract. For the forwards, we had Derek Grant signed for $700,000, so less than
this was a bit of a shocker. This was a bit of a shocker to me.
And
I didn't expect him to be back, and I didn't expect him to be back at kind of a marginal pay raise. I mean, he's only making $100,000 more a season, I believe, than he was on his. Actually, no, he's making the same. Sorry, he's making the same that he was on his previous deal, or 50K more. So it's interesting, to say the least. I'm a little surprised they brought him back. you would have thought that maybe guys from San Diego would have been a little more deserving of that spot. I confused slot and spot there. But the Ducks seem to have a big-time love affair with Derek Grant. He's a fan favorite. He's a guy who I guess is fine as a fourth-line center. That's, I think, all he is, really, is a fourth-line center.
He's fine.
I think I don't even know if he's fine, to be quite honest, but the Ducks seem to like him. He's probably not going to play very much now that Randy Carlyle is gone. So it's just kind of a whatever contract. It's a body.
Yep. And then the big one out of this is Ryan Miller signed a 1-year deal for $1.125
That's the big one.
Yep.
That's the big one.
And I think this is a good move for the Ducks. I mean, basically what it came down to was whether or not the Ducks whether or not Ryan Miller wanted to play another year. I think all signs led to the idea that Ryan Miller was going, if he was going to come back, it was going to be with the Ducks. They had a good relationship with him. He had a good relationship with them. Him and Gibson work well together. He's been kind of a bit of a mentor to him. And so I think at 1.125, it's good value. I guess the only concern is as 38 years old, it may start to add some wear and tear onto his body. And so hopefully he doesn't break down, because when he broke down last year was when Gibson basically had to play in every single game. And so that is a slight concern.
He also broke down when the Ducks were allowing $1 million in your chances
that is
a game.
Also true.
So,
that is also true.
And in a way, it kind of worked out for him last year because he only played in 20 games. So although he did get injured, which adds some miles, he also played 8 games less than the year prior. So maybe he actually has a little more left in the tank. I think it's a good contract. Like you, I agree. He does have a modified no trade clause. So it's a 6-team trade list. So if the Ducks are in a position where maybe they want to flip him, send him to a contender at the trade deadline, they do still have somewhat of that option. Clearly, he negotiated some security for himself, but there is a possibility that the Ducks could still get some value out of him if he's having a good season and they're out of it by then. Maybe they can send him to a contender who needs backup goalie depth, just like we thought almost happened last trade deadline. And then it didn't happen.
And maybe he added that as a 6-team so he could control it, because maybe he understands this might be his last year, so he wants a chance to get a cup.
I mean, he's 38. It's depending what he looks like next season, I would be pretty surprised if he came back for another year. Yeah. But Ryan Miller's kind of becoming one of those guys who seems to be defying age a little bit. Yep. He's still very good, even in his past couple seasons, age 37 and 36. So I think all around, to kind of sum up these 3 signings, I'm perfectly fine with them. I think Derek Grant, Korbinian, Holzer are just kind of depth pieces for this team, and you need that. Every team needs that. You can definitely debate how worthy Grant is, I think, of being re-up, but it's a 1-year deal at such a low cap hit. You almost kind of shrug your shoulders. And then I think Ryan Miller is going to be good value behind Gibson. The hope would be that he can play upwards of 30 games. I don't know if that's what he'll be getting. I think that would be my only slight concern, slight pause on bringing back Miller. Although he is very good, you would almost prefer a guy who can play even more games, just because I think the priority should absolutely be for the Ducks, with 8 years remaining on John Gibson's contract, to be able to find a way to preserve his body as much as you can. And so they get another year out of Miller, and I think they'll find better ways to maximize him. But I think if he doesn't come back the year after, they really need to prioritize a guy who's almost like a 1B goalie. I think that's the way that they need to go with this.
Yep. All right. So one last thing I want to just briefly touch on before we jump into questions, because we've got a fair amount to touch on. But prospect camp this weekend, I believe it starts, Wednesday through Saturday. Saturday is the only day that will be open to the public. It will be at 10 a.m. at Great Park Ice and 5 Point Arena. And the list of prospects that will be there will be Jack Bodini, Simone Benoit, Max Comtois, Lucas Dostal, Hunter Drew, Roman Durney, Ole Eriksson-Ek, William Francis, Brent Gates Jr., Benoit Olivier Grue, Brendan Gooley, Matthew Hill, Trevor Janik, Max Jones, Jack Kopaka, Jackson Lacombe, Josh Mahura, Blake McLaughlin, Garrett Metcalf, Antoine Moran, Jackson Perbix, Steven Ruggiero, Kiefer Sherwood, Sam Steele, Troy Terry, Henry Thrun, Brayden Tracey, and Trevor Zegras. So basically all the guys that were drafted this year, plus I found interesting essentially all the guys that could make the team next year minus Isaac Lundestrom, and some of the guys from last year's draft also.
Right. Lundestrom potentially dealing with some injury troubles. We're not too sure where that stands right now.
So not sure why,
but yeah,
it's going to be exciting.
A lot of fun, though.
We'll be both you and I and CJ will be there. I believe other members of Anaheim Calling will be there, like Tony, like Bonnie. I believe George may or may not be there. Don't quote me on that. And he'll probably correct me in the Twitch chat one way or the other.
We will be there. And this is actually one of my favorite little things. It's probably one of the biggest benefits of living in the area is that you can go to these things. They are open to the public. They're a lot of fun. They're usually pretty good intensity when they get to the scrimmage portion. You get to see the players up close. You get to kind of see how they are on the ice, just between drills, stuff like that. It's always a really good way to get familiar. I think, learn the most about these guys outside of obviously NHL games, just by kind of watching these scrimmages, because I feel like you can really get a good feel for what kind of players they are.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's jump into some questions. Let's try to blitz through these a little bit. We got a fair amount that are good ones, though. Boomsat Band said, does Isaac Lundestrom get underrated among all of Ducks fans? He looked great last season, and I think is a legit shot at the roster, maybe as a wing next season. I don't know if he's underrated. I think
he's properly rated.
He's not flashy. He kind of does the right things. If he's going to make the team, it's going to be in that bottom 6 role. I think the reason why he's not exactly talked about much is he's not flashy.
He's not flashy, and I mean, he also didn't score a goal in 15 games with the Ducks last season. So you're not really going to get noticed as a prospect when you put up 2 points in 15 games. That's just not really how it goes. But I do like him as a prospect.
George asked us, what are your predictions with how players will respond to Eakin's system? And mentioned, is Randy Carlo basically actually going to be working in the front office like it was said? I have no clue, and I sure hope not. But I believe that the players are going to respond well to Eakins. It's going to be a younger roster. That's kind of what he's geared towards. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that it's going to be a pretty smooth. I think there will actually barely be an adjustment period.
Yeah. Boom Snap Bam asked, any thoughts on Ben Hutton going into free agency? Seems like a guy the Ducks could look at. I really don't think the Ducks are going to really be looking that much at free agency. I think the team's pretty much set. If any moves
the team is pretty locked in. Yeah.
If any moves are going to be made, it's more so going to be through the trade, not free agency. Daniel JJ09 said, which RFA do you see most likely to be offer sheeted?
Oh boy. I think at this point, the offer sheet possibility is kind of going down because the teams that were really under the threat of getting offer sheeted, so Tampa Bay and Toronto, have kind of corrected, well, not necessarily corrected, but have done a good amount of work to alleviate their cap situations. Ryan Callahan, obviously, with the unfortunate situation with his health, so that contract is going to be out of the way shortly. I mean, right now it's going to be on LTIR, but I do think they'll find a taker for that. That's going to help them. They also traded JT Miller. I guess we forgot to talk about that. Yeah. But they traded JT Miller. So I actually think they'll be fine. Also, Erik Karlsson re-signing with San Jose kind of eliminates the need for Tampa Bay to do all that juggling. And then in regards to Toronto, they just moved out Patrick Marleau's contract. So I actually kind of think the summer, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like the summer of the offer sheet might already be over.
I think there's going to be offer sheets. I think there's way too many players out there.
Who?
I could see Aho getting offer sheeted. I could see Timo Meier getting offer sheeted.
But Timo Meier, that's the one I'll give you. Because they're not. The Hurricanes are going to be fine when it comes to Aho. They're probably going to trade Justin Falk. So, but Meier, though, I will give you because the Sharks are really under the gun cap-wise, and that is a team that's vulnerable.
Yep. Well, I guess that kind of answers the question that we had. I'm trying to find it real quick, but someone had asked, who do you think's more, who would you rather off-sheet? Oh, this is who would you rather off-sheet from Lewis. Timo Meier or Sebastian Aho?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I guess Aho is probably the guy I would rather have, but Meier looked really damn good in the playoffs. I mean, one's a winger and one's a center, so it's kind of a tough call. I think I would go Aho, but maybe recency bias is having me leaning towards Timo Meier right now.
Okay. Two more I see that I want to hit on. Dorkwing asks a question. Does the return of Grant and the high likelihood of Zegras joining the Ducks sooner than later make it more likely Henrique gets moved? Getzlaf, Steele, Grant/Shore, Rowney down the middle?
Well, you do have to keep in mind that with Carter Rowney, he has one more year after this contract. And so I'm not totally sure what they plan on doing with that. We keep kind of waiting for Adam Henrique to be traded because there always seems to be a situation that's just perfectly aligning for him. I don't know. I think this team really likes him, and I think that they signed him to that extension for a reason. So we'll see. I think that it really depends how Zegras looks immediately. If he comes out of the gate and is just, Calder Trophy candidate, that type of thing, then that's where I think you see Adam Henrique getting moved. But by the same token, if Zegras is that good, then you're not as reliant on Henrique or Getzlaf, and then maybe you're in a better spot to make some noise. So I don't know.
Do you want Henrique or Getzlaf to be your third or fourth line center, though? With Henrique making 5.
Sure.
With Henrique, sorry, let me rephrase that. Do you want your third or fourth line center making $5.825 million?
It just depends. I mean, I'm fine with that if that player can really dominate those minutes or can be really good in those minutes. It's not a contract that you signed. You didn't sign Adam Henrique to be a fourth line center, but if that's how the cards play out and you're not in a cap crunch, why not?
Yeah. Boom Snap Bam asks, quick question, where can I go for tips on how to read and understand advanced stats? I would honestly just say Google. We've had some different articles on our own website over the past year or two that have kind of dove into that. You and I have done some analytics-based podcasts, which I need to still upgrade and get onto the new format. So they will be there eventually for you to go back in the back catalog and find. But it's one of those things, and reach out to us on Twitter. I'm more than willing to kind of run through different things with you and how to understand them. But it's basically just listen to as much as you can, read as much as you can. Sites like Natural Stat Trick have really good glossaries. Go to their glossaries and really kind of see what they have. Also, StatShot.
Also Hockey Graph's website is a really good one because what Hockey Graphs I think does better. Well, they're pretty much the only people that do it as consistently, but it's that they actually post the kind of studies that people do. So they post the regressions where they're actually weighing, Corsi against points in the standings or weighing expected goals against overall team success. And so then you can kind of read it and decide for yourself, okay, now I know the numbers, I know the correlations, and I can decide for myself if this is actually worth it. And that's Hockey Graphs, not Hockey Graphs. So people are asking.
Hockey Graphs.
Hockey Graphs.
What was it? Rob Volman. Rob Volman's books. I think it's Hockey Prospectus, I think is what it is. He has those that come out every year. Don't quote me on that one though, but he also has a book called StatShot, which is a good starting point. It's very dry because it's very stat heavy and stat based, but that is a very good book if you're interested in stats and you
it's
like
kind of the
numbers.
nature of the game.
Yes.
If you want to know more about stats.
But so go look up Rob Volman. And yeah, so I think that's gonna kind of do it for questions. But I did want to mention, also, I forgot to even mention, we do a live stream of this show at twitch.tv/acpod where you can interact in the chat. If you've been listening to this, you will have heard us interacting with the chat, talking about different things. And so if you want to watch us live, keep an eye out, subscribe to us or follow us, on Twitch, subscribe to us also. And that is a way for you to support the show in a way that's completely free for you. And if you have Amazon Prime, you have Twitch Prime. You just have to hit that subscribe button each and every 30 days, and that helps us out significantly. The other ways that you can find us are we do put this show on YouTube. You can search Anaheim Calling SB Nation on there, Anaheim Calling on there. You will find us there. You can also, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/acpod, where we will be cranking out in the next week 2 different episodes to get the 2 episodes out for June. So there will be 2 coming out in this next week. You can also you can also subscribe to us at Apple Podcasts, and that is actually where you can actually do something for us in a way that helps us that's completely free to view. If you like this show, leave us a rating and a review. And we actually got we got one this past week, and I'm finding it real quick, from Scott And if I can find it, I've got it. 5 stars, the gold standard, said Jake and Felix constantly bring a high-quality podcast to the Ducks supporters. Between hot takes and latest rumors, this is a must-listen for Ducks fans. They've rapidly become an integral part of the Ducks community. Between pickup hockey games or meetups at the games, the lads provide a friendly environment to share views and information. Keep up the good work, and # Perry is still good. On that note,
Boom.
We should make mention, on top of the prospects playing at Great Park Ice this weekend, we will both be playing there in the Anaheim Calling pickup game. It will be on Sunday at 11:30. So I believe all spots are taken, sadly. But if you want to come and watch and hang out, come on down. Come on down. I believe we'll be on Rink 1 at 11:30. And yeah, and
11:30 a.m.
11:30 a.m. Yes. We also got, and I'm going to read let's start with just one of them. We'll slowly get through these as we go through, but I realize once again that there are other Apple Podcasts websites for if you're in a different country. So what we can view are only Apple Podcast reviews in the U.S. So if you have left us a review and you are in a different country, please let me know. I will go and find it. I found this one. I believe it was from June 11th, 2019. 5 stars, says 5 out of 5 from Down Under. I wasn't really much of a podcast listener, but given the fact that I'm on a train for 2 hours a day, I decided to get on board. Picked you guys, and to say I'm hooked is an understatement. I've listened to all your podcasts for the last 2 seasons in only 2 weeks. I'm like a kid in a candy store. What I get when I get that notification and the new podcast is up. Go Ducks.
I know exactly that feeling he's talking about with the podcast I've listened to. It's like, oh yes, the new episode is up. Let's go. Yep. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. So it's definitely humbling to hear these opinions. There's a couple others that we'll kind of crank through, not to really kind of make the entire end of the show all reviews of the show. So we'll get to them as we go on. But like I said, let me know on Twitter at ReindeerGames91 if you have done a review.
Jake went through the Apple Podcasts of basically every country.
I tried
last week.
I had to guess.
It's pretty good.
I had to guess countries. I had to guess what the code would be in the URL.
Apple Podcast Zimbabwe, I believe, is a
thing. Yes. So
all right, great. Well, I believe that's going to be it for tonight, guys. So just to reiterate some of the stuff that Jake was going over, if you want to support the show further, beyond just leaving a review, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/acpod, which we have been putting off a little bit in this summer month, but we are going to kick back into high gear with our off-season previews. We should probably crank them out before free agency hits, because that's going to basically write the script for us. So that's patreon.com/acpod, and for $5 a month, you get 2 bonus episodes. So if you really enjoy the show, if you can't wait to get the notification for new episodes, well, then we can give you even more. And that's just for $5 a month. Totally worth it if you're a big fan of the show. And if you still want to support, but maybe you're not totally on board with paying $5 a month, totally your call. You can still show your support with just $1 a month. And with that, you get access to our supporter-only Twitch chat. And
Discord,
so that's where Discord chat. Damn it. I knew I was going to get that wrong.
You almost landed that plane. You almost did it.
Discord chat. Yes, so Discord, real cool platform, makes it real easy to chat. We can go back and forth. It's real fun, especially when there's like breaking news. So I believe that when the Corey Perry news came out, that not that he'd been bought out, but that he was going to get bought out, it got pretty hectic in there, and it was fun to kind of break everything down with our great supporters. So again, that's patreon.com/acpod. And of course, check out AnaheimCalling.com. That's at Anaheim Calling on Twitter. And then also check out Jake on Twitter at ReindeerGames91. I am on Twitter as well at Felix_Sicard. That is going to do it for us this week, guys. Also, you don't just have to support Jake and I. I mean, when you go to AnaheimCalling.com, there's a lot of real good articles up from our various writers in regards to the week that was in the draft. You know, John Brownbent, of course, always big on the draft recap. Justin Ritzel has been chipping in. So really just check out the site. It's been really buzzing, and it's probably only going to get busier with the upcoming free agency days. So keep it locked in, AnaheimCalling.com. That's going to do it for us tonight, guys, and we will catch you at the next podcast. Talk to you then.
Bye.